think off the beaten track, Vyšehrad takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.
Hello and welcome back to Prague off the beaten track. Last time we explored Vyšehrad's National Cemetery, the final resting place of some of the Czechia's most remarkable figures. But Vyšehrad has more than just history on the surface. Beneath its fortress walls lies a hidden world. In this episode, we are heading underground into the Vyšehrad Casemates, a network of tunnels and chambers that once served a military purpose, but now hold quite fascinating stories of their own. And today, I'm actually trying something different. Rather than just telling you about it myself, I've brought along a guide who knows this place inside out. And I think I'll let him introduce himself.
My name is Daniel Reimann. I work as the visitor service manager at Vyšehrad, so I'm responsible for the guided tours here and for, let's say, the good experience of people coming to Vyšehrad who are willing to join our guided tours or our little museum, Gothic cellar, etc.
So where are we going now?
So at this moment we are in the underground tunnel from the 17th century that is generally called a casemate or casemates, which is a broad term for an underground or hidden interior that served for military purposes in the past. So a safe place for soldiers. They could hide here when there was a possible danger. So when the place is under attack, this tunnel we are currently in is a great place to be, to survive.
So, 17th century. Why 17th century? Why not earlier? Why not later?
Well, the second half of the 17th century was some sort of, an hangover when Czechia was quite exhausted after the 30 Years' War. And 30 Years' War was kind of a shock for, I think, the Austrian monarchy. And there were, I think, very large investments into the defense of several cities in the monarchy, including Prague. So in the early 1650s, Prague, or not only Vyšehrad, but Prague, was fortified in a new, much more modern way at that time to survive attacks made with heavy artillery like cannons, grenades, explosions, and so on.
So, for example, when the Swedes plundered Prague, there was still no fortification during the 30 Years' War.
Well,
fewer.
Yeah. It was more like an improvisation. So I assume some palisades rather, and some bumper zones made of ground or soil, but nothing really professional that was required at that time.
You know what strikes me? I mean, how long is this corridor?
I think over 200 meters, but we are visiting only one section of the tunnels at Vyšehrad. So in total, I think it's over a kilometer, but we are seeing only about 25%.
When I think about it, 17th century, that must have been quite hard work, no? I mean, to do that. But
Definitely. And luckily, we have some, let's say, original materials describing some accounting records and stuff. So we can read through papers that I think witnessed the construction process. And it was definitely very expensive. It took decades. But on the other hand, we are not in a tunnel that was, let's say, purposely created under the ground, but at first they created a construction made of stone, and then they brought a huge layer of soil to put it over. So it's a sort
they
of
covered it, basically.
Yeah, it's a sort of artificial underground in a way.
Has it ever been used in a military action?
I think trainings were conducted here, definitely, but it was not in a real, I think, test when it comes to any battle or attack. Vyšehrad was occupied by foreign armies, the army of Prussia, or Preußen, the state that no longer exists, and the army of France. But, let's say, locals didn't resist it before, and it was only occupied, but not under, let's say, real attack, real fire at that time.
So, we just came into this very impressive hall, I would say. What is this place?
This place is called Gorlice since the early 20th century, but actually the walls, the mass of material is much older. And in the 19th century, it was a storage for the military equipment. Actually, now it's only one floor, but in the past there were two more levels. So it was like a three-story place. And originally, it came into existence as a huge misunderstanding between the architect of the Vyšehrad citadel, Mr. Josef Priamy or Giuseppe Priamy, and the company working on this site, on this part of Vyšehrad, which was a private company at that time.
So, what was the misunderstanding about?
Well, the key misunderstanding was about the position of the defensive wall, because at first they created the wall on one side, and it's specifically this one. They nearly finished everything, and then apparently the architect learned about the position, and he was quite disappointed because he intended to make the wall a few meters on a other place.
So the outside, yeah, I mean,
exactly.
So they had to build another wall, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly. They started over, built another wall, and in fact they enlarged the bastion, which also means that the wall that was built at first primarily became useless or with no specific purpose, and then very, I think, peculiar space was created. Two walls, one next to another, but one of them was a mistake, basically. And for instance, in the 17th, 18th century, there was no ceiling at all, so it was a kind of a
space,
wasted area.
So they decided to make use of it, and they built the roof afterwards?
In the mid-19th century they created gigantic arch above us. I think it's one of the biggest in Prague. Biggest made of bricks. I think it was a difficult job, because when you look at both sides, they are not the same. It's asymmetrical. The curvature on the right side is way different than the curvature on the other side.
Just for the listeners to have an idea, you don't have to say exactly, but how big, how long, how deep, how high is the ceiling here?
I think we are speaking about roughly 300 square meters, when there is only one floor nowadays, and the height to the ceiling, I think it varies. It's not 100% stable, but it's about 12 meters, and then we cannot see it from here, but then there is a huge layer of soil above it. So the ceiling is not the very top, but there is a invisible layer above us too.
Above us, yeah. And why is it called Gorlice?
This is quite, I think, an interesting story. It has something to do with the World War I, because I think it was quite early on, I'm not sure, I think it was 1915, when there was a very important battle between the Austrian-Hungarian army with German army against Russian troops close to today it's Polish town called Gorlice. And Russian troops were defeated at that very battle. And when soldiers came back, soldiers from the Austrian-Hungarian army, some of them were from Vyšehrad. And right next to the Gorlice Hall, outside, there was a very small something like a farm. They kept pigs and chicken, I think, in there, and it was a little place to produce meat for soldiers, or food for soldiers. And they started to call it Gorlice to commemorate that big victory of the Austrian-Hungarian army. And later on, the term Gorlice started to be somehow connected with the interior that we are currently, at this moment here.
We can see some statues. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 statues, and there's a kind of group statue. Where are they from? What are they? They look beautiful.
Yeah, well, originally they are from the Charles Bridge, and we have 6 originals standing here. Most of the originals are in a different building at this moment, at the opposite side of the river, called Lapidarium. So some of the statues are being preserved or kept here at Gorlice. So Gorlice is sort of lapidarium as well, or a little gallery, and they were transported here mostly during the 1990s. So let's say it started, I think, a couple of years after the Velvet Revolution.
So once again, this citadel was built mainly in the 17th century, right? When did the military stop using it? When did they hand it over to civilian authorities?
Well, for sure, it was in usage of the military during the World War I, and as far as I know, during the Czechoslovakian state after the World War II, it had completely different purposes. Like, for example, for a short time period, it was a storage for potatoes and vegetables, because you can literally feel that it's quite cold in here and the temperature is not much warmer even when the summer is hot. So it changed its purpose. But speaking of the military usage, I think it was mostly used during the 18th and 19th century. But in the second half of the 19th century, I think the importance quite dropped.
I was just going to ask you, because I did the previous episode of this podcast about the Vyšehrad Cemetery, which is quite significant, and that was actually established, in its present form, with Slavín, etc., in the late 1880s, I think. So,
the cemetery...
Probably the military use wasn't so important.
Yeah, when we speak of the National Cemetery, it's a thing of the 19th century, but the cemetery itself exists for hundreds of years.
No, there used to be the cemetery with the church, obviously, St. Peter and St. Paul's, but then they declared it the national.
Exactly,
Yeah.
That's correct.
Is there something that I didn't ask about that you would like to mention? I don't know, some detail, some story?
Well, Gorlice is quite popular, as we found out, when it comes to cinematography or filmmaking, and not only Gorlice. For instance, in the Casemates tunnel that we have visited, one scene from the series of films Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise was captured or made, and here, right in Gorlice, quite a famous Czech comedy Je ruka netleská was filmed.
One hand doesn't clap.
Yeah, and not only that, also in the 1970s, where there were no statues at all, quite a famous comedy, Mysterious Castle in Carpats was filmed here as well.
Very interesting. So Tom Cruise was running around the corridor, the passage.
Exactly.
I have to watch it again, because I know that he's running around the Old Town Square and the Charles Bridge, but I didn't know that it was here as well. That's amazing. This is accessible to tourists, right? Are you open all the time? All the year, every day?
Yeah, actually we are trying to be open as much as possible. So mostly we are open from Monday to Sunday. Only a few exceptions during a year. So I think it's quite easy for visitors to come and to buy a ticket so they can join to one of our guided tours we do every day.
If I may ask, what do you tell the people who come here about the history that you explained?
Yeah, well, they learn about the importance of the Vyšehrad citadel and its story of the construction. And it's actually early modern history, mainly related to the history of military and architecture, and also they can see the statues that are important chapter when it comes to the history of art.
But as you said, it's early modern history. You don't deal very much with Middle Ages and the meaning of Vyšehrad for the Czech statehood, etc.
Well, not particularly in the case of the guided tour visiting the Gorlice Hall, but we have other options. So if visitors want, they can also join other guided tours, and some of them are touching the topics of the medieval Vyšehrad, which I think medieval Vyšehrad looked totally different than what we can see today, and there are still some traces of the Middle Ages here and there at Vyšehrad that you can see if you know where to look at.
So that concludes our journey beneath Vyšehrad with Daniel Reimann, exploring the underground casemates and the stories hidden within these centuries-old tunnels. As always, you will find photos and additional information on the pages dedicated to Prague off the Beaten Track at the Radio Prague International website. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode or any other, please make sure to follow Prague off the Beaten Track on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Stay tuned for more discoveries on Prague off the Beaten Track.
Prague off the Beaten Track. Vík Pohanka takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.